Hey, what is going on, CoD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and today we have a very special guest with us. Someone that I ended up hearing a little bit from on a previous interview that I believe she had started off with Slongers, like kind of some clips here and there, and I thought to myself, man, this is awesome to be able to not only get a female gamer in, but also someone with a varying and differing perspective on games and obviously in Kingdom Builders for what we're going to be talking about today. And again, we have Wahid1 with us who, again, to my knowledge, and I don't know, I know we briefly were talking about this for a moment, but you may actually be the strongest, if we even want to say female gamer within Call of Dragons at the moment. I don't know if that's fair to say, but at least from a lot of the other top players I've seen, you may be the top, if not one of the top that I know of. But regardless if so or not, Waheed, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, it is my absolute pleasure. And I know we were talking about some life stuff here before we started, and I guess I'd love to know if you can give me maybe a little bit of a background on yourself for, how did you start? And specifically, let's go, if we can, with when maybe you got your introduction into Kingdom Builders, and then maybe what were you playing a little beforehand, and then how did you even come across Kingdom Builders, and what was your first one?
Yeah, so I've always done mobile app games. 10 years ago, the first castle builder came out, which was called Game of War. Very first. No one had ever seen anything like it, and that was kind of where I started. And it was an interesting game that there'd never been a game that was like pay to win like that, where the packs would come in like certain denominations, you'd have limited time packs, and people would just spend like crazy. There's actually, I think, a couple news articles or a couple situations that you can read about in the news where I think one person got arrested for embezzling like $2 million from his company to spend on Game of War. So just to kind of put into perspective, it is like the same addiction that you have now began then. And there was a bunch of a bunch of things that are similar now that are different then, and vice versa. One thing that was very different then is that we didn't really have like hospitals. So when your troops died, when they were killed, when you were like on a node, or when your troops were out and they were killed, they were done. There was no bringing them back. You had to buy more packs and retrain. So the stakes were a little bit higher then. Which I kind of appreciate now about this game, is the stakes are not as high. It is way harder to like get zeroed for real or to lose your troops. So I think that's one really nice thing.
Wow, no, that definitely seems very interesting. So I did play a little bit of Game of War, and we're talking Fire Age, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
you did.
Okay. Yeah, so I played a little bit. Now, not to the point of where I would say I kind of had a full understanding of participating in every aspect of it. And I think the additional part is because it was so early. I mean, I think the game came out kind of middle of 2013, around July.
Yeah, it was like 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, it's been a hot minute. And so I just remember when I played, I saw it come across the App Store. I downloaded, got past the tutorial, and then I was kind of playing on and off here and there for a bit. But I know it's been so long for me because I know when I touched it, it was right after it came out, and then I just had never played it beyond that. But you sound like you had played. How long did you play for after you got into it?
Oh gosh, a year and a half, which for me is really long with these games. Like I usually have like a 6-month stint, which I'm coming up on now, but I'm actually still interested in this game. But yeah, that one I played forever, and it was cool because that was really the first mobile app game that had like commercials during the Super Bowl and had people like Kate Upton and all these celebrity spokespeople.
Yep.
It was just such a different thing. It's such a new thing in the category. It really created a category of its own, I should say, even in the game world.
No, 100%. And it's interesting you say that because they did this as well with when Ninja was going around and doing commercials for Lords Mobile. And there was a few other people that were doing this as well. And I remember that was kind of around the time when he was really, really blowing up from the Fortnite biz, and you ended up seeing, I think it was a couple. I know he did at least 1 or 2 commercials with them. And they were national, I believe. And so it is interesting. You mentioned the Kate Upton thing because I remember that. And they did this with, didn't they do this with Raid Shadow Legends? They had a bunch of celebrities, or some celebrities, like Ronda Rousey was there, and they made her a skin, and a few others that I just remember seeing these kind of come across here and there. But to transition from there, one of the things I know I had seen on your profile was that as I was kind of just doing a little bit of kind of a light deep dive, but you have a image on your gallery right now where you have a screenshot of an interview that you did with I don't remember who it was. It was projectgameofwar.com, it looks like. It doesn't say who. I'd have to find the original article, but where you did an interview. But specifically here it says that you were one of the most dominating figures, one of the top players in the game, which is obviously something that I'm sure you graciously left out. But during your time there, right? And I'd be really curious, what did it look like in Game of War? No hospitals, in that environment early on. How was it as a top player? And I want to ask this along with you comparing maybe to how it feels being a top player in Call of Dragons, with how early it was there. Did you notice a different approach in mindset? Did you notice a different way that maybe players either came to you with questions? Did they look up to you? Did they fear you more? Again, if you can maybe paint a little bit of a landscape for what was it like in Game of War, and then maybe what is it like for you in Call of Dragons and some of those differences?
It was a lot different in Game War, and I think because it was the first of its kind. Like right now, you can say, "Oh, I'm the top player in this mobile game. I'm the top player in that." There's a lot of them. There's a lot of top players in a lot of mobile games. Back then, that was all there was for these mobile games. So when you were like a top player, and I wasn't number one, but when you were like a number one player, I mean, you had like stalkers. You had people who were like sitting, writing you mails and DMs and trying to find out who you are and where you are, and people who are like literally sending you like love letters. I mean, the amount of just insanity involved in this, I'd say the celebrity insanity was just beyond anything I had ever seen. Like, we're here playing a fake video game, like we're living in some fake video game world, and people are acting like they're meeting Justin Bieber. You know what I mean? It was very strange. A lot of very strange people. But you know, the nice thing that is similar though is you still have that sense of community. I will say that in this game, the population's way smaller. Like, you kind of can get to know everyone in your server almost. Whereas back then, it was quite a bit different. There were a lot more people. But you still get to have that community, which I think is something that's very, like, very much in Castle Builders just in general. Whereas a lot of other games, you have a sense of community, like World of Warcraft, which I was always big into. You always have like a sense of community, but just in these Castle Builders, you spend so much time together. I mean, I played with some people 10 years ago. One of them is like the godfather now to the other one's son. I mean, like,
dang.
You know, I mean, like, it's those connections, those relationships that you forge are just so huge. And I think that's why a lot of people continue to play these games. Every time I swear off it, I say I'm never going to play another Castle Builder again because they cost me too much money and too much time. And then 2-3 years later, I'm right back where I was again. But, you know, it's just there's something special about these games. There really is.
No, I mean, I think a large part of what you said hit a big chord for me when it comes to, and you mentioned about building communities and long-lasting relationships, and I mean, geez, what a minute that must have been to be someone's godfather. So just, but I reminisce with that because, you know, it's funny if I, just for a brief moment, when I go around and I have these projects that I'll do for Kingdoms, one of the things I notice, and even outside of that, is when I started playing Rock, after initially it came out as Rise of Civilization, then they rebranded to Rise of Kingdoms. However, at this time, when I was starting out, there's still people that I talked to that I played back in 1196, which was, you know, shortly after beta for Rock, and they... some of the people I played in that kingdom I still talk to. I mean, this is 3 years ago, give or take. And I still have good relationships with a number of them. And even now, when I look at my time in Infinity Kingdom, And it's funny because when I kind of made this transition from Rock to IK, there was this moment where I then went and said, I had players that would come over, right? Because I was kind of building my own community and whatnot.
And spray.
And probably under the sink or in the garage. And so when I made this transition at the time, I noticed that there was quite a few players that were interested at the time in checking out Infinity Kingdom because it was like this new thing, and you had some other content creators that were getting involved in it from Rock when it had its early introduction. And when I started doing some projects in there, I noticed that a lot of people, quite a bit I should say, from Rock that had been with me before, either had played with me or had been in previous projects, wanted to come and join. And then when Call of Dragons came out, a very similar thing happened where I ended up getting this healthy mix of, at least for my time in 65 when we had that project going on, we had this awesome mix of players from Rock and from Infinity Kingdom that came over, and these are people that I've known. I've either had multiple conversations with, I've talked in voice calls, they were with me in previous projects, and they were looking to not only get in to Call of Dragons, but wanted to join up and be a part of something that they were familiar with. And being able to kind of have those relationships or those bonds, building that good rapport, as you alluded to me, I think is really what it's about. I think community is very underrated and very underappreciated when you're trying to build something that is inclusive, and you can really call it, maybe more than a community, but you can call it almost kind of a home, a family, if you will, people that you just enjoy chatting with and kind of being involved with on a day-to-day basis. And so I guess I'm curious on, when you started getting into Call of Dragons, and obviously with where you initially played, walk me through a little bit of kind of how you came across COD, and then where you landed, and maybe how that community aspect built from the kingdom you started in after.
Yeah. So it's funny. I have a group of friends, probably about 20 friends, that we did play Game of War together 10 years ago, and we've always stayed in touch. I've probably met, it's funny, I was thinking the other day, people from Game of War, I've met 18 people. And I was like, wow, that's actually a lot. But yeah, again, that's that community. Like, you really get to know people. So out of that group, there's probably like 4 or 5 that I stay in very close contact with. And they always invite me to every new game they start. And for some reason, this one I decided, yeah, I'm going to download it and just check it out. Like, I'm just going to check it out. I'm going to be free to play. Just hang out, Obviously that didn't work out. But when I started playing with BxS, which is the group that I've played with for 10 years. A bunch of different games we've done and stuff like that. When I started playing, our core group was there and everything, but as time went on, most of those people quit or moved on. Just the life cycle of these games sometimes isn't that long, and people have real life. So a lot of those players quit. And then I ended up going to, very long story, but I ended up going to DX, which then merged with JEDI, and now we are TFS. So just to keep track of that, yeah. So BxS to DX to DX plus JEDI to TFS. So yeah, it's really cool. I'm enjoying everyone here, and it's really fun being a part of an alliance like this.
That's not good.
All right, man. No, that is, geez, I think anytime you're building something like that with the group, and from what you're saying, it seems as though when you had your 15, 20 people that came over, just having kind of a core group that goes from whether it's game to game or just new adventure to new adventure. I guess it makes it easier because there's so much more familiarity. But to me, it almost feels like there's a little bit of a safety net too as well, right? Where you have where you think to yourself, maybe, I have these players that are coming with me. Yeah. I'm not just solo, and maybe it almost kind of feels like you have a little bit of a kind of a backup, if you will, or just I guess a higher chance of maybe things going better for you. Is that kind of sometimes how, when you go into other games, when you think about, I have this core group of people that I enjoy playing with, and I go into this new kingdom, it almost feels to you, or this new game, and then obviously you go into a new kingdom, do you almost feel as though, what, now that I have this and I've done this for a while, I would just never want to go into a kingdom solo ever again?
Yeah, actually, thinking about it like that, and I don't think I have thought about it like that, but going into these things, because generally when I go into a game, the community is the first part and the game itself secondary. And that's when I first download it. It's, hey, my friends are doing this, so I'm going to go and check it out with them. Then that scale kind of evens out at a certain point, right? And that's why you stay in the game. So going into a game and just going into it solo, I've done it once. You know what? I will say I have done it once before. I played Game of Sultans, and I was the top player there. And when I played that, I went into it solo and actually made some really great friends who, again, I stay in contact with today. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I could go either way, but I think it is a lot more fun when you have that, like, group of friends and you have that, like, I mean, it's just fun even being able to talk about the game or talk about the new people that you meet. Because I'm sure, as you know, there are some very interesting characters in these games. So it is fun having other people to kind of talk to about that. Like, wow, do you see this person? And to say, like, hey, you know what? Let's run this play like we did in this battle 5 years ago. You know what I mean? It's like you kind of have that common knowledge, which helps too.
Yeah, no, 100%. And what's funny is I noticed, because I had also seen from one of the pictures that was on your gallery where you did an interview as well for Game of Sultans. And I think it was you holding up a Charmander figurine.
That sounds about right.
And so, it is one of the, it is, again, I find it such an interesting dynamic when we get into the idea of playing kingdom builders, at least how I, love to refer to them as. And, I know other people will, call them, maybe whether it's castle builder or if it's a city builder.
Oh, yeah, it's interchangeable.
Exactly. Whatever it may mean. And usually at the end, when you kind of get to the common denominator, it's pretty consistent. Like that's what we would probably just refer to as like the baseline, regardless of how someone might refer to it as. But okay, so let me say this with you being obviously and again coming into the game. Let me ask what attracted you to because again you've played obviously I would imagine quite a few kingdom builders from just some of the ones you've named so far. But what really attracted you to CoD? Why even come over? Why even try it out?
Well, I had one really good friend of mine who I did play Game of War with. He and I have played probably 4 games together. I live in Florida, actually. He lives in Florida. We hang out all the time. One of like my really close friends. And he had texted me and he's like, hey, you want to play this game? And I'm like, okay, what is it? And he's like, I mean, it's kind of like a castle builder, but like, and I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not playing that. So then another of our friends had texted me too, and he's like, come on, Julie, play this game. I'm like, I don't know about that. So eventually they all wore me down, and I decided to download the game, again, under duress, because my friends made me.
Of course.
And they kept promising to me, they're like, but your troops won't die. They kept promising me that. They're like, you can spend and your troops won't die. And I was like, what? Like, you mean they're not gonna, I don't have to retrain? Like they're gonna stay there? Like, what are you talking about? So that really, really interested me about the game, is just that idea that like your money, your investment, because I hate calling it investment, but that's how people look at it, that your investment won't like disappear overnight. I mean, you get zeroed in like Game of War, you could lose $5,000 in a night, in an hour, in 30 minutes. So this was definitely a nicer game.
Yeah, no, I can sympathize. I know quite a bit from my time in Rock, and I'm sure others as well that played, where you can train forever. You could have 1 billion troops if you really trained that much, and or I'm sure spent that much over a period of time. Where you have deaths that essentially come on your troops from not only being in the open field but also in rallies. In Rock, but obviously here, we're only really getting deaths for rallies, which, some people, I think there are some mixed feelings on that. However, I do like to believe that the system itself at least is more free-to-play friendly in that regard, where because you're not having heavy deaths that are being incurred in the open field all day long, and it's really just you needing to heal and them trying to figure out, what system is going to be somewhat of a nice balance between those that spend and the free-to-play, the opportunity to heal as well, so they can keep fighting and keep engaging and really probably sustaining fights for as long as they can. So I think that to me almost seems like somewhere kind of in the winner's realm of, hey, we need to try and kind of figure this out and get that right. But at least for me, playing for the Kingdom Builders I've played, I like the idea of that you don't necessarily get deaths from the open, at least thus far with how CoD has been playing out. I like the idea because I think that it not favors, but it leans more towards the free to play side, but it's still enough of a punishment where you could end up, your hospital can fill up to 1 billion, right? There's no limit essentially. However, and so really, if you think about it, the thing you're really limiting people on is their ability to get back into a fight as soon as possible, or as early as possible, because you're just sending as many troops to the hospital. So instead of really creating deaths, you're really, I kind of almost view it as you're just creating time pockets. You're creating pockets of time between the fight that's happening and then what that delay is going to be until someone can kind of get back into the fight, right? From
that's a really good way to look at it.
From the healing mechanic. So, but again, that's my view on deaths and kind of how I look at it, at least comparing it to some other games. And I'd like to believe that the free to play enjoy it, or at least I hope I should say that the free to play might look at it in that type of maybe full encompassing, where they're not, and I understand sometimes it can be difficult to look at things kind of beyond what your personal play is, what's happening to you as the individual, because for someone who's a free to play, they may not be able to look at it from someone who spends, or even put themselves in that mindset, regardless if they spend or not. And I would imagine same thing vice versa. It might be difficult for someone who spends or who has predominantly always spent in games, regardless of how much, to probably put themselves in that free-to-play side, because they may not be aware of, what those kind of time durations are for just a regular upgrade. As an example, if they're boosting or if they're just getting right to Castle 25 and Max Academy and, they're getting a Max VIP incredibly fast, or even if it's anything close to that, their sense of time and how long things take is I don't want to say skewed, but is elevated because of the fact that they're progressing a little bit more. So I imagine that there are some differences there when it comes to how so for how I look at it, I really like the job that they're doing. But let me transition here. So you end up getting in, you start out in your home kingdom, and what I'd love to know from you, right, is maybe, and again, I think I love hearing it from different perspectives. So I'd love to know, what ended up, because obviously you and others have migrated out. You mentioned that, I know when we were talking about before, you ended up going to a different kingdom. So I would love to know from you, what really, how did your Season 1 Plus go? Or maybe how did Season 1 go, Season 1 Plus go? Then what really kind of made, I guess, how did that decision come to fruition of, okay, we're now at a junction or at a point in time where, we need to leave and maybe just, either find other pastures, or if it was something where it was like, no, we just really needed to kind of get out of Dodge, or it was more, okay, cool, we're just kind of amicably leaving to find something for other reasons that may not be relevant to the kingdom. So I'm curious if you can give me that breakdown. Like, how did those first two seasons go for 1 Plus, and then what ultimately led to that decision?
Yeah, it's really, I will say the thing with these castle builders is nothing's ever simple, is it? It's never simple. When you deal with people, nothing's ever simple. So the first season with BxS, we had played and we were fighting against Jedi. Now, Mephisto was a part of Jedi at this point. So we were fighting them nonstop. I mean, it was days and days of no sleep for like, a month maybe, month and a half. And then Mephisto had his situation where he left Jedi. And as a joke, I said, hey, let's send him an invite to the Alliance. Like, just as a joke, right? Because we saw him without a tag. We didn't know what was going on with Jedi. We just saw him tagless. So we sent him an invite, and then he joined. So that was the beginning of that. Obviously, once he joined us, we were pretty much just demolishing Jedi at that point, to the point where I think we took it too far. I think we just kept pushing them, and that probably didn't need to happen, but that was what happened. So then we went into Season 1 Plus with Mephisto, his group, some others, and just to, so going into season 1+, we were going against DX and JEDI. We had known that they were going to be the main competitors, but we didn't know that they were going to team up. So them teaming up just kind of made it a little bit tricky on us. And at this point, I was R5 of BxS, so going against all these different alliances was really tricky. Neff was getting more and more irritated with it. You know, it's hard to get participation when you're kind of on the losing side of something and people are seeing that, like, wow, like every time we go out, we get smashed. You know, it's really, it's difficult. So I kind of hit a point where I decided that I think that I should propose to my team that we get some kind of peace treaty going. And that would at least give our guys the ability to farm. So I did a poll of all the members in BxS, and I asked them, you know, one question with 3 answers, which was, do you want a ceasefire? Do you want to just do whatever, like just burn everything? Or there was another, I don't even remember what the third option was, but 70% of people wanted that peace treaty. So I went in and negotiated a peace treaty, which all of my team had agreed with, and we thought was the best path for us. And to backtrack, because this is important from the BxS's side, or they feel it's important. To backtrack, in the beginning of season 1+, I met Jason G, who was and is the R5 at DX. So we ended up dating and having a thing, and we had that throughout season 1+, probably since the beginning of the season. But obviously we didn't tell people because our alliances were arch enemy alliances. You know, like that's not really something you want to advertise. So
Understood.
only our R4s knew. Some of my R4s knew. Some of his R4s knew. Just enough where, like, okay, it's not like being shady. So anyway, Mephisto, after I made that peace agreement, after I was trying to make it, Mephisto finds out about that, and that really upsets him for a few different reasons, but he got very, very, very upset about that. So when he found out about that, he decided to start spreading these rumors that I'm some master spy, that the R5 of BxS is a spy for DX, which made no sense. You know, I mean, you'd see how many troops that I had hospitalized and that I didn't sleep fighting. So, you know, it was a bit of silliness. But when the peace treaty came out, after Mephisto had stormed out and left our alliance because he was mad about that situation, then people started thinking again about the peace treaty, and they thought, was this the right thing for us? Could we have held this land without the peace treaty? And what I ended up doing is, now here's where like the big fight kind of came to play. And we had in the peace treaty an agreement where Lorcan would be like a free-for-all, right? Like you can go there and it'd be a PvP zone. No one would like really own it, but we'd fight there. Now, the rule was that we had to remove our flags from there, which became the miscommunication. My R4s thought that we could have time to remove the flags. They didn't have to be removed immediately. Whereas I understood they had to be removed immediately. JEDI understood they had to be removed immediately. DX, same thing. So I went and I removed the flags, and that caused a very toxic situation within BxS between my R4s and me. So after a couple days, I decided, you know what? I think it's better for me at this point to go to DX for the reason that A, you know, I would kind of be removing myself from that situation, and B, I wanted to play with Jason, so win-win. So I went and did that, and then obviously there was a ton of drama after that, which involved them taking Neff back, and, you know, a bunch of different people, and then us going back to war, and then they broke the peace treaty by rallying one of the DX players. It was a very complicated situation, but throughout all that, I did go to DX, and I really enjoyed myself there. And it was really fun, and, you know, it was interesting too to be able to have the opportunity to kind of meet the JEDI people more, because even though I've been fighting them since the beginning of the game, fighting someone and being like on the same team is very different. Like I'd always fought the Lights, like Northern Southern Lights. They are incredible players. Always fought them. So it's kind of cool now to actually be on their side and being able to be on the battlefield together and knowing what their strengths are and being able to kind of like know like, okay, yeah, they got this or they got that. So that was really cool. And then going into season 2, DX and JEDI decided to merge together and take, you know, the strongest fighters to kind of make a super alliance. So we did that, and then we ended up in 39 with TFS, which was the Freak Show. And wow, that was a very long explanation. I'm sorry. Oh, no, I know
But
he's the same. You don't mind just barked as soon as you said that, by the way. So you jinxed us all now.
no, exactly, man. Hopefully, there's a little bit of restraint in my tiny, upper-sized poodle, super-sized poodle, I should say. I will. So yeah, man, that was. So I was actually trying to take some notes down too as well where you were going because I know that obviously seemed to be quite a bit. I'm sure for the average person listening in.
How fast can I get through like 3 months, 6 months?
Yeah, no, and again, I think you did a great job with. Okay, I think you did a great job with summarizing for sure. So no, thank you for that. And I can only imagine. Oh gosh, I think breaking it down there, and again, you mentioned this before with prefacing that, when you're playing these types of games in this genre, there is and can be a lot of politics. There can be a lot of drama that can happen. There can be,
little.
He said, she said. There can be disagreements that literally turn into all-out wars, in the kind of most extreme situations, and probably anything else that the average person could think of, but maybe wonder if that happens or not, and on their side of thinking it could happen would probably be right. And obviously it's not to say that these types of situations or things can happen in every single kingdom, but they are things that can happen and at times can even plague kingdoms, especially ones that may even be on that kind of uphill or that uprising and just really be on good trajectories for their level of what we might refer to as, hey, this kingdom is doing really well, they seem pretty successful, and literally everything, just the snap of a finger, over something that might appear to be small could really end up being big to others. And then I think and maybe other aspects as well, very similar to what you were saying with the towers being removed and maybe some miscommunications there. I think our ability to have what I like to refer to often as soft skills is so important, is so undervalued in maybe like gaming where you have kind of big guilds or big groups of people in general. But I think at least for when it pertains to kingdom builders, the way that we communicate and the way that we speak and how clear we are or unclear we are, all of those things, just even the tone that we have when we talk to some people. I mean, I've had people get offended, when I was conversating with some Turkish people, and not to obviously give a general label, but for some of the Turkish people I've conversated with, sometimes for at least the ones I've spoken to, they can be a little curt, they can be a little more direct, they can maybe be a little more flat in their tone, where it's maybe not necessarily as lively, but because it comes off in that way. And again, I'm only saying for the ones that I've spoken to, but it's little things like that, those nuances that we may not view as, oh, well, hey, this is just different in how they're speaking to me. I shouldn't take this at face value, and kind of more with a grain of salt. But even something like that can be so impactful for maybe something that doesn't turn out the way that you thought it would. So it's very interesting just to hear you because I love listening to those. I love breaking those types of situations down and thinking about, well, okay, well, what were our junction moments, right? What were the moments where if we kind of in hindsight do some self-assessment and we say, okay, well, maybe this moment, right, it would have been great for us to maybe get into a voice call and talk about this, or maybe it would have been good for us to write everything down on paper and do universal announcements to both the alliances so everyone's really on the same page, or maybe it would have been good for us to get into a call with our officer team and our alliance management team, right, so that way everyone would kind of know, here's our FAQs, right? So if you get questions from the members or things like that, right, here's how you guys go about answering it. Like almost kind of treating it to some degree how you would treat running a small business, with just being efficient and effective in certain areas. And so that is, again, I will say, I am sorry to hear how some of those things ended up panning out.
Hey, it keeps it exciting. And it's funny when you say that with the different junction points, because even, when I look back on it, I'm like, wow, there were really two critical things that I would change if I could change anything. Number one, I would have told Neff about Jason. I wouldn't have let him be blindsided. Number two is when we were talking about the flags being deleted from Lorcan, I would have made sure that everyone is on the same page and understood that, hey, this is the procedure. This is when the flags have to go. And then if the group itself, because there was really one or two people being loud against it, which, out of 10 is a little different. But if the entire group felt that certain way, I would have gone back to them and said, look, we need more time. So, there's a few different things that I would have changed 100% on what I did. Obviously I'm not blameless in all this either. It's a lot of going back and forth. And I think that everyone could have handled things differently. But then again, if that did happen, then we wouldn't be where we are today, which is very exciting too. So it's always, but you're right. It's very interesting looking at those junctions and how the game would have changed and how the game would change for everyone involved. If, I had done this versus that, it's crazy when you think about it.
Oh, no, absolutely. And, I can say for, one of the things I really love doing in these types of games, I love the whole kingdom management aspect. I love being, maybe not necessarily going as far as saying, like a senator or a politician, but I love, it's almost, I guess, maybe more like a grassroots, like a community leader, right? Someone who kind of grew up in a neighborhood and they just care about everything. They care about everyone in that neighborhood, right? It's like you're from there. You want that place to do well. You want to see your community do great. And I like to think that that's kind of how I view myself when it comes to the projects that I always kind of aim to build in their ideal state for how my vision, how I view it. And it's very often that there's so many things you have to account for. There's so many things, there's so many factors that will play in, whether it's for player to player relations or interactions, from alliance to player, from leader to officer, from alliance management team to players, and and then the cross alliance interactions that you have, and then even how does that play out from a kind of kingdom governance level if you end up having some type of a council system or maybe some other type of varied system that you might apply, and then how do those relationships work from there, and then from top down. It's just it can be a lot at times, and it can be. One of the things I often talk about is always having a good level of transparency, right? Never putting yourself in a situation where players can misinterpret or they can take something and then misinform others, right? So you're always trying to do your due diligence, if you will, right? Trying to make things crystal clear so that way you are limiting your margin of error that can happen from things that are spread. And I like to think that maybe is just a good approach in life in general, but at least again as it pertains to kingdom builders, I very much, and that's a whole nother I think side of kingdom builders that doesn't usually get talked about too much, when we really think about kind of managing more than just one alliance, right? A group of alliances, or even more so a kingdom in its entirety, where you're really, talking about caring for everyone. Now, obviously with CoD, we know the developers have come out and said that they're a little bit more alliance focused, more so with how they're approaching it, more so than the kingdom as a whole. However, and I don't know if you saw the video I did where we kind of polled the 27 through 90 group early on about how many of them were unified, right? How many of them felt they were unified or were unified going into that S1 Plus season, coming out of their first season. And we ended up seeing from the data that was shown then that, the majority, I think it was like 70% or so of the kingdoms felt that they were, I think 90 or 100% unified. And then you could just tell that a majority, very healthy majority of them really felt that way, if not knew that they were, from the amount of responses we got. And so I guess I'm curious on your view for playing, and again, whether you maybe did some of this in Game of War or Age of Sultan. I don't know how much kind of kingdom managing, or it was just more, hey, we're just kind of here, we're a part of it, but we're, really focused on our alliance, and we're kind of looking to work with people, or it was kind of more solo? I guess I'm curious on when you started playing Game of War, then maybe to Age of Sultans, and now COD, was the approach different there? Was it more, hey, we're just about our alliance, or hey, we're just more about our players, and we don't really care too much about what happens in the kingdom? Or were you more engaged at that time? And then maybe how did it differ, or if at all similar, to Call of Dragons?
Call of Dragons is interesting in that, like you said, there's a lot more of a focus on the alliances. Whereas in other games, in Game of War, it was the first of its kind. We didn't realize that destroying servers would be a bad thing. Or we didn't really care. Kind of both of that. So we would just go through and burn everything. Now, in future games, we kind of did the same thing. We just went through, burned everything. Game of Sultans did the same thing, burned everything. Now, for this game, though, that strategy of just focusing on the fam doesn't work. You have to have these, diplomatic talks with other groups, and you have to have these alliances between guilds for you to be successful. That was one thing that BxS, we learned the hard way going into Season 1 Plus, is that we didn't solidify any alliances. We had gone in, we had talks with TD, which was like Saad, who's another one of the top players. We had talks with him, and then we had talks with Jason. That's how we met, about what our goals are for the kingdom, what our goals are for Season 2, and whether we're gonna link up. And at that point, we had decided that we're not going to align with any other alliance, because we felt that if we were to align with another alliance, we'd have a Farmville season. Now, what we didn't realize was, by not aligning with anyone, they all aligned against us. And we can have Nephisto, we can have me, we can have all these top players, but if you are going against 10-1, you can only do so much. You're going to keep getting destroyed. And that's what we learned in Season 1 Plus. Is in this game, you can't just show up and destroy, because you stam out, you run out of troops. Even the top players can only send out their ordos so many times, So this game is very different in that regard. You cannot win as an individual for many reasons. You can't win as an individual because of the territory you need. You can't win as an individual in an alliance because you're going to stam out. So that was one thing that's very different here.
I think it's very, very well put. I know I've had, we had similar situation in 65 early on for that project where, because a lot of what ended up occurring was in Zone 1, it was very difficult to essentially move people from adjacent provinces or adjacent Zone 1 provinces. And so, you ended up having to either have people resurge, which is just a hard ask of anyone, and it's not necessarily something I usually advise as the first thing to do. It's typically the last resort, or if needed, and usually in those cases it's more likely that your spenders would do that, if so, because they're just able to recover faster than a free-to-play. And then you have the other option where you basically kind of Jake the Snake and you chain jump Zone 1 provinces, which we ended up figuring out after a period of time from just doing a couple tests, where you basically just have to have, you can either do it one of two ways. You either have the alliance that's in that region that you're trying to get to build into your Zone 1. They cap a behemoth, and then people from that zone can join that adjacent alliance. Or your alliance builds out into their Zone 1, you TP onto their territory, then you can join any alliance in that new zone, right? And you basically just chain it. So you have like one alliance that extends into the adjacent zone, and then you have another alliance in that zone build into the next new zone, right? So you'd have like someone in, as an example, you'd have someone in Sophrostia, like an alliance in Sophrostia, build out to where they just flag a few flags out into Nivola. Then players will TP from there onto the flags in Nivola. Then they can join any alliance in Nivola, and then an alliance in Nivola captures the pass going into Darlin. They flag out a couple flags into Darlin, right? Then you just keep chain jumping. Obviously, you still have to incur the cooldown, but that was one of the ways that we figured out early on that we could kind of do it, because we basically had, 1 to 2 alliances in every starting Zone 1. So a lot of what we kind of had to do was almost do this group mass, I don't want to call it a migration, but like this mass, I don't want to say even exodus, that probably isn't the right word, but just mass movement of as many players as possible to kind of get over to this one zone, right, where we were kind of fighting this war at the time against, I think it was DS. God, I'm forgetting their name right now. But yeah, so we ended up kind of having, again, in similar respects of kind of having to, move people. What we realized was that if we were able to get all of the numbers there, if we were able to get all of the players there across the 3 or 4 shells that we had at that time, from between Darlin and Nivola, it was very much like that. Like, we were fighting them essentially on 4 different fronts, and that was basically the game plan. It was like, you have to fight on multiple fronts, you have to spread them out, you have to bait out the strong players, basically wasting their stamina, and other things that we did as well. But what we realized is when we were able to fight on 4 or more fronts, the odds were more in our favor, because if you're just going up against one, mega-ish alliance based on how they were kind of building at the time, they just can't be in all of those places at once, especially if you have kind of more overall combined power than they do, kind of splitting that up, similar to the 10v1 situation that you mentioned. Obviously, that is a lot more than what we did on our end, so I can only imagine. But I love the what you mentioned about, like, look, you can band all these strong players together, and you can have this type of mega alliance, if you will. But the fact is that there's no easy way to replenish stamina, right? So it's not as though as a spender you have more of an advantage than necessarily a free-to-play player does in that regard. And so you can, again, if you have 5v1 or 7v1, you can really, as long as you have decent-ish power, right? It's not like if you have 10 alliances with T1 and T2, again, I can understand they're probably not going to do too much against an alliance of T5. But if you have, a very healthy amount of T4, maybe some T5 mixed in, even if the alliance you're going up against is mostly predominantly T5, and you have the numbers, I think for me that's one of the most enjoyable parts I really like about Call of Dragons is it feels as though there's this opportunity where it's not kind of it doesn't just feel like an immediate overwhelming loss, right? If you're going up against this kind of Goliath, right? It almost feels like the David versus Goliath scenario is more realistic in COD. And I think for that should give free to play and even low spend, in my opinion, a higher level of appreciation for Call of Dragons versus, in my opinion, other games. And I think that's such a great thing to look at. Again, I don't know if you might view it that way, or if the 10v1 just kind of left you salty a bit, so to speak. But again, speaking in the broader sense, I love that the game offers that. And that's, I think, the message that I'd love for them to even promote more, because to me, I feel like that's more attractive for the average player, especially the free-to-play.
So true. And I love that about this, because it evens that playing field to a certain point. And, I've said many times in my quote-unquote gaming career here is that the free-to-play players are the most important. Because if you just have a bunch of whales sitting around, we're not that interesting. Like, we need to have the players who bring that, like, energy and that fun and that personality to the game. And when we start, pushing them out more and more, and they leave the game, then the whales leave too. Because the reason that we hang out isn't just for other whales. We hang out for our players that make it enjoyable and make it fun. We have this one girl, like Ashley in our alliance, who's just like, I swear, she just roasts me to death, like, every single day. And she's like, a small player, and I would be so sad if she's gone. Like, there's players like that, though, who just, you want them. Even though they're not the spenders, they're the ones that we want to keep. And, Lilith and Firelight, they have to keep that in mind, too, where the reason that we're here is because of them.
No. So I want to transition a little bit here, maybe just to the last few questions, because I know we're going almost 50 minutes, and I'm sure I'm probably going to be getting death stares from my lady here in a moment. But what I would love to ask is something that I think is it's an interesting opportunity, right, when you have this, at least for me, right, being in this kind of a situation where I can speak to not only someone like yourself, but someone who you would say is kind of more a part of that 1%, if you will. And I'm not negatively labeling, but just because I think it's always fascinating to get the insight from those that are in those types of situations where you are a stronger player, clearly you spend, and this is always, to me, one of the things that we like to try and peer into, right, which is the mindset, the psychology of the player that I often talk about, where, to me, as someone like yourself who is a stronger player, you do spend, the because you just kind of hinted at this, which I thought was great when you were mentioning about like, hey, just because we are stronger players or we're whales, we obviously don't want to sit here and just play by ourselves. So I'm curious, and obviously your not to say that your mindset is universal for everyone, but I am curious to ask you when you go in and you're in your kingdom and you're playing. Is the idea that you would like the kingdom to be as active and healthy as possible to get as much potential turnout in different varied situations that you as a spender can participate in? Or is it more of, you know what, we don't care if we're the only active alliance because, we'll basically just fight against ourselves, at the end of the day if we really need to as spenders, if it's just, hey, we have one alliance and we're just funneling all the top 1% in there. I am curious on, I guess on your approach or your feelings there. Does it matter to you? Does it not matter to you? Where do you kind of fall?
Oh, that would be my absolute nightmare if it was just us. I love having a lot of different players, from that free to play to mid spend to what have you. I think it makes it more fun. It makes the fights more interesting. Because if it was just T5s on one side, the T4 players are going to stop fighting because it's not fun for them to just sit there and die by counterattack or counter damage. That's just the reality of it. But when there's other T4s for them to fight, then that's fun. So I want to keep our players happy. I would gladly give away 50 million of my power just for these people to stay and have fun and, do what they need to do. I think that just having that healthy balance and that alive kingdom is just so important.
Okay. Wow, that's I'm going to be honest, it's pretty powerful. I don't know if I've ever heard someone say they would give away power just so people could stay, but
yeah.
But I will say, I love that testament because for me. And, again, one of the things I absolutely love doing is I love researching. I love educating myself. I love going out there and looking at how other kingdoms operate, how other alliances operate, the approach and perspective that other players take, especially at varied levels, whether they end up being free to play, low, mid, high spend. And so I think understanding the player psychology is so impactful to how games can, and I would like to hope is factored into their development. And so, I guess as we maybe transition a little bit to, well, when it comes to kind of the direction that the game is going with them saying, oh, well, we want to be a little bit more alliance-based. So some of the things that I've talked about, and I'd love just to hear what you think. One of the things I'd love for them to add into the game, and I don't know if you saw my video about it or the suggestion that I posted, but for them to add in home kingdom leaderboards. So you can see everyone that is actually a part of your home kingdom, or at least obviously the top 200, right, for the max number that you can go to on the boards. But being able to just have that differential of saying, okay, well, here's my home kingdom leaderboard, so I know here are my active alliances, who's actually running those alliances, because otherwise, if you go into your merge season, you have no way of knowing that, right? Unless you're already in contact with them, and you already know that they're making the alliance, or you know what their name is, and they haven't changed the name, and you're maybe someone who pays more attention to that. But if you're maybe the average player, and your alliance isn't communicating maybe as well with you, you're not in a Discord, or maybe you're someone like myself who likes going into kingdoms just to kind of see, what are their boards, whether I'm doing like a stat series, or even if you're just the average person who wants just to reach out to someone because you get paired with them in a KVK group and you want to reach out to them for diplomacy conversation, right? It could be a slew of things. But for me, I would love to see them add in home kingdom leaderboards for a multitude of reasons. And I guess I'm curious on something like that. What do you think?
It's funny. There was another game that I played, and I can't remember which one it was, but we really, really protested to the developers to create global ranking boards. We didn't have it. We wanted it so badly, and they ended up doing it. We had enough people complain about it, but that's something that I would love to see. Because right now, you have to make fake accounts on some of these servers, which now I think you're locked out of the ones that have gone into that next season. But we would have to do that to try and see even who is ranking. Like right now, I don't know what Nephisto's power is. I would have to log on to that kingdom and check. Right now, the rankings in what I think it's Nephisto, Jason, Northern, Southern, me. That could be wrong. If we had a global board, that would help us a lot. And that also gives you kind of something to strive for too, right? Like I think that a lot of us at that higher level are competitive, and being competitive I mean, it would help the game for them to say like, oh, this person wants to power up even more to overtake this person. So I think it's a win-win for everyone involved. So I really hope they put something into place like that, or like you said, like, a home kingdom leaderboard. I think that would be really cool.
Okay. Okay, no doubt. So the global thing's interesting because they did something like this in Infinity Kingdom where they had global rankings for alliances. And I think they would update maybe once every hour, every couple hours, something to that degree. And but I think it was just for alliances. But it would show you, what color they were, because they had kind of different factions there. So you could be, I think it was like green, blue, or red. But then they also showed you the kingdom they were in. So but then you could also look at servers as well. So like they had a filtering system. So you could look at, like if you just want to go look at a specific kingdom, you could go look at a specific kingdom and then all the alliances that are in that kingdom. So it obviously,
that's cool.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. It was basically almost kind of like a Google Sheet type filtering thing, but just their own interface that they had. And one of the other things they had in there too as well, they kind of had like this in-game like content space in it where you could go and you could post videos as a creator, or you could write articles if you were someone who likes to write, and then people in the game could go and access it. So like
that's cool.
Yeah, it was a really cool idea that I liked that they did. And the reason I liked it was because it allowed for every single player that played the game to effortlessly access it. So if you wanted, if you weren't wanting to take the extra steps to go join a creator's Discord, or maybe go, online to their YouTube or somewhere else, right? You had this opportunity to kind of do it that way. So I just kind of like the varying approach. Let me get to maybe one of my final questions here, which is, again, I would love to know right now in the game as a whole, what are some things you would like to see them add to the game that you think either add or change right now, going forward, right? Like if you could pick a few things that could get put into the next update, what would they be, whether it's new or changes?
That is a very good question. I do wish that they did, I almost said Pokemon, but I do wish that they did the pets thing a little differently. I think that that's still very confusing. I am very confused by that still.
Okay.
So I think that if they were to put in a little bit more explanation behind things, or just a little bit more resources for us to learn and understand different features that they put in, I think that would be huge. I think what you said along the lines of having some kind of leaderboard, that would be another huge one for me, just because, again, it's so much running around and trying to find this and trying to find that. And I mean, not to put you out of business, because I know you do an amazing job pulling together those sheets, and you are the only one right now that we have, because we don't have a leaderboard. We have a bossnasti. I think that would be really helpful to have something like that too. And, also just additional ways, and I don't have, the answer off the top of my head. I hate complaining without an answer, but some different ways to get the free-to-plays engaged in different ways that they can be involved in the game that don't involve them like going against T5s. I don't know if that's like some kind of different battlegrounds or something. I don't know, but I think that would be a good focus for them as well.
Okay. I definitely have an answer there. But
do you?
I do. But my answer would probably be, so I made a video on this. My answer was probably a little bit controversial, but my view on Kingdom Builders is very similar to something like a World of Warcraft, right? Like one of the things, I don't know if you've played WoW or if you've had people that have told you anything about WoW, but one of the things I always heard from people before I kind of dabbled a little bit was people would always tell me, you just need to focus on grinding. Like get to your level 70 or your max level, right? Whatever it may be now. And then once you get there, just focus on nothing but that. And then you'll eventually be able to start enjoying more parts of the game. Things will open up for you. And I can't tell you, I probably spoke to maybe 10 different people before I started doing it. And they basically just all told me universally the same thing, which is grind to get to your max account or max level. And then it's interesting because when I look at Kingdom Builders, I view things very similarly in that way, right? Where you have the people that spend, they're obviously doing it so they can get ahead, they can start unlocking kind of endgame content sooner, right? In the ideal sense, is you're trying to progress, you're trying to do things faster. But on the free-to-play side, you don't really have that luxury at any level. So, for me, when I go about creating kingdoms in the projects that I do, a big focus is trying to create situations where players have that opportunity and the ability to focus on 100% development. So that way, they can progress at the most efficient and effective way possible to get to T4 and T5 as fast as they humanly can, by spreading out resources, by giving out good tips, by educating the average player, and doing these things, right? So you can put them in situations where, because the sooner they get to T4 or the sooner they get to T5, the more likely it is that they will then be more willing to engage and go out there and fight. Why? Because, for example, one of the things I talked about is once you get to Castle 25, you max out your academy. Once you max out all your buildings at 25, you potentially max out your academy, or you get kind of, maybe you just want to have max T4, whatever it may be. All of a sudden, you're reducing the amount of outgoing resource streams, right? So you don't have to spend resources now on buildings. You don't have to spend resources now on academy tech or double buildings or double tech, right? These are things that you're saving essentially resources on, right? Because you have a flat rate of income that you're able to get from resource gathering outside of buying, of course. Again, we're looking at it from the free-to-play side. So you have a flat rate that you can get, that you can max out at. It's like a hard cap, right? Whatever you can do per day, if you send 5 gatherers out, you're doing max tile gathering, they come back, and then you immediately send them back out, right? You have a hard cap on how much you can get. So you have to think about, you have this hard income cap, but your income cap is being dispersed between 6 or 7 outgoing resource streams. So the idea is that if you reduce those outgoing resource streams, then all of your income that you're getting from RSS is going where? It's going to fighting, right? It's going to PvP. You're either training troops or you're spending it on RSS healing, right? That's predominantly where it's going. And so if you think about it from that perspective, someone who's a free-to-play is now more likely to want to go out there, balls to the wall, and just fight to their heart's content, because they don't have to worry as much about then spending resources in other areas. However, that, again, can be a hard pill for some to swallow. It is the truth at the end of the day, because we're just talking about what the statistics are and the facts of what is and what is not. But ideally, for someone like myself, I can tell you, I am more likely to go out there and fight if I know that I can go do all this fighting, and then I can just invest all of the RSS that I'm then gathering from income to just go out to restoring my healing. Like, the idea is that if I have to then spend my RSS on other areas, it's only going to take that much longer for me to get back out into the fight. So it's very interesting when you think about it from that perspective, because nobody really talks about that, right? Everyone just kind of talks about.
And that's so true. I mean, it's frustrating for me even to see, so during wartime, I usually go and fill up all of our players under 30 mil with resources. Mm-hmm. And that's the one thing they always will say to me too, is it's like, I couldn't fight unless I can use these resources to heal. Because, again, like you said, they're having other things going on. They're trying to build, they're trying to research, and it has to go one or the other. So either you're in constant fights and you can't build at all, or you're not fighting, you're building, but then people are getting mad at you for not fighting. I mean, it's very difficult.
Let me, if I can, I'm gonna knock your socks off in the best way. I'm gonna give you a Jimmy Neutron brain blast. I don't know if you ever watched Jimmy Neutron or
I'm excited.
Okay, so one of the things that I often hear from stronger players, or from people that spend, is why aren't more people out on the field fighting? Why aren't we getting the support that we need? Why aren't people filling rallies? Why don't we just remove people from the alliance and get in stronger players, as an example? But then you have to then ask the question, well, how can you and I'm not saying everyone does that, but how can you demand that? How can you expect that of a free to play or a low spend if you are constantly hoping and or expecting them to fight, when at the same time they're not able to develop their account to then be better fighters and better contributors, because then they'd have better stats, they'd have higher tier troops. You see what I'm saying? It's a very interesting dynamic, where it's, on one side, you kind of almost have what I would view as unrealistic expectations. Not that the people that are asking that or expecting that have ill intentions, but they are very unrealistic, where you're kind of asking, like, you want your cake and you want to eat it too, type of a situation. And to me, that is something that I think has always kind of plagued kingdom builders, is that free-to-play has just always kind of been in this situation where, because they're not always focusing on 100% development to get to either max T4, max or T5, and at least all their buildings max at 25, so they don't have to worry about doing any outgoing resource spending, they've always been in this kind of definition of insanity, where they're just kind of circling the drain, and not forever, but more in a delaying sense, where where for every single moment, right? It's like those people that love playing Grand Theft Auto or campaign games where they can max out everything at 100%, right? Main quest, side quest, everything. You take a little bit of that into COD, and then you say, well, okay, well, if I really want to max everything out so I can get in this situation, I have to focus on 100% of it, because every action or decision I make that is not 100% development focused on my account is only going to delay me getting to that point even further, where I can then be a better contributor, a better fighter, a better supporter, right, of the top players in my alliance or that are in our kingdom. So,
Yeah.
you know, how about them apples?
Oh no, I'm so with you, and that's it though. That is absolutely it. And I could talk about this for like hours about the free to play and mid to play and things we can do. But I mean, that is the biggest frustration that I hear and that I run into is it shouldn't be that the only way the only way that I can allow my guys to fight is for them to have enough resources to heal. I mean, that's just bonkers to me. So if there was one thing to fix, I like your idea. I think there should be a fix like that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And again, I want to point out, I'm not telling people don't fight. I'm just saying that if you're looking at it, if you're looking at it from the outside perspective, it makes a lot of sense. Where it is hard. It's a hard ask, right? And that probably is like the golden question to really figure out is how can I solve that, right? How can I always get more people to engage and join in on fighting? Which I'm sure for every kingdom is always going to be something that everyone kind of has to figure out an answer. But with that in mind, I know we're about an hour and 5 minutes right now. So let me say, I know we've been trying to get this going for a minute, and I know I've kind of had to postpone 2 or 3 times on you. So I very much appreciate that we were able to get this in today. And Waheed, this has just been an absolute pleasure. I could talk to you for another hour or two. This has just been so awesome.
This is fun.
And again, I really appreciate the time. Lastly, I'm just going to give you the floor. Let people know, again, if you have anything going on, if they can come and check you out anywhere, if, maybe you just want to give a shout out to your alliance and members, the floor is yours, please.
Yeah, I would just say that, coming from BxS, we had some amazing players, and I'm just really proud of everyone who fought there. We fought for, 4 or 5 months with no stop, and those guys, those free-to-play, those mid-spenders, amazing. You just would never see heart like that. And same was when I was in DX. The players that we have made this game so fun for me, and the reason that I'm still here. So, I really hope that those free-to-play mid-spenders, they keep going and they keep making the game fun for all of us.
Awesome. Well, no, well said. Well said. Well, okay. I am going to go ahead and dip set out of here like just someone on the run, essentially, because I have to go give my little one a bath. But again, this was such a fantastic conversation, and again, like I said, very enjoyable for me. I'm happy we could get this in today. And hopefully, maybe we can do it in the future, maybe with some co-companions, let's say. But I will definitely keep in touch and be on the lookout for how you guys end up doing this season. Everyone, that is going to be it for us in this episode with the fantastic Wahid1 from now 39, who is, again, like we mentioned, right, one of the top, if not strongest, female players of the game. This was an absolute pleasure for me. And again, right, let us know what you guys think in the comments below on anything that we touched on today. I know there was a lot. I'm going to do my best to try and break this up with some timestamps just to help a little bit along, because I know the conversation was more kind of podcast formatted as far as the duration of time. But yeah, that is going to do it for us, fam. As always, until next time, I will catch you later.